everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone, whoever is wherever. Today is the second day of the CNX 2021. And this today is especially, very especially focused and designed because of the support from AIBD and Flumena. Thank you very much for helping us out and bringing out lots of people who have got great background, great studio, great voice, great, audios, and especially related to the oral society. So thank you very much for that. And today I just want to say in the intro is that today's session is especially focused on what kind of synergy we can create between community networks and community radio in the digital era, because radio hasn't gone anywhere, right? I mean, anywhere back. So it has been a part of our society and community, even though we have been overpowered by digital era. So how do we marry it in a big way, and how various examples that we already have, especially ISOC and DF has worked together a lot on this year to bring them together and work together. We have many examples and all that. So today session is the same, 2 hours, around 2 hours here and there, 10-15 minutes. And it is divided into 3 parts today, unlike the other day, which is divided into 2 parts, 3 sessions, 45, half an hour, and 20 minutes and 45 minutes. But all this session belongs to all of us. It's just structurally a little bit of divided, but not really divided. So the first session will focus on discussing what is the current scenario, what's the background, how these 2 sectors operate, and what kind of synergy can be thought about. The second session of it is that we will share a few examples of best practices and all that. And the third is that how do we really commit ourselves to work together to take it forward. So that's actually it is, and that's how we have to discuss role of connectivity, role of synergy, role of content, role of context, a role of audience, of course, which is largely audiovisual in the background of half the world not connected, and yet they are part of the communication challenge for both of us, for all of us. So I will hand it over to Philomena and Rajneesh to anchor this first session. And then in the second session, Rajneesh will continue to anchor, but I will make the presentation of 3 cases. And in the third session, again, Raj and Philomena will come back and I will be part of the discussions. But none of us are going anywhere. Everybody is there. The responsibility is between me, Raj, and Philomena to make sure that we find something meaningful out of this entire gathering to take away something. And Philomena, especially thanks to you to bring the entire community of AIBD from all over the world. We see that how our registration went up and very high. We got more than 400 plus registration. And I already saw before even 10:30 here in the morning, lots of Sri Lanka and here and there people are logging in and saying hello, hi from different parts of the world. I still see that radio bringing in so many corners of the world saying hello, hi is just awesome, So thank you very much. And now hand over to Raj and Philomena.
All right, thanks, Osama, and good day to everyone, wherever you may be joining us from. For some of you, it's quite late, I do realize. For some of us, it's early, and for some of us, it's nearly beer o'clock. So, we'll try and get things moving. First, to acknowledge Philo and her team at AIBD. So this is a collaboration between the Internet Society and AIBD and DEF in bringing together 2 communities which have significant overlaps, significant synergies, but I think we've never really been able to see how we could leverage each other's capabilities. Now, over the past several years, DEF and the Internet Society have worked with community radio in South Asia in particular. For example, Bazrul has been a common feature at our events as an example. And we've talked about it quite often, but I think this year it gives us an opportunity in conjunction with the AIBD to see how we can widen the scope out. But not just that, but also looking at the subject matter experts we have with us today in what they can offer in terms of advice and guidance, and how can we merge these two communities together. I see some great synergies, obviously starting from the first principles of technical knowledge. An internet network needs radio knowledge, it needs one to know how to put up a mast, et cetera, et cetera. The second bit, of course, is the focus on local content. More and more what we can see, particularly in rural areas, people are quite interested in what's happening locally, right? So as an example, where I live in Australia, more often than the national newspaper, I read the local newspaper first. Similarly, I prefer to listen to my local community radio station rather than the national radio, unless it's ABC, which is a different ballgame. But so there is, of course, even for someone like me, there is an interest in what's happening locally, as well, of course, what is happening elsewhere. And I think if we move into the rural areas, into the communities that both our groups are working with, I think we realize that much as people like to know what's happening outside, they also want to know what's happening in the local vicinity, right? We know radio has been so very important through the ages. I remember in multiple sessions I've been over the last 20 odd years, and one thing that's always been said is radio remains king or queen, if you will. If I look at the Pacific Islands, for instance, if I look at parts of Southeast Asia and South Asia, it remains the same. Radio is critical to people. And similarly, now we see that the internet is also critical. But unfortunately, a lot of our communities where they live, they don't really have internet access. So that's why I think there's this unique opportunity we have with community networks and community radio. The community radio people are largely speaking where we want the internet to reach as well. And just being able to bridge that gap would be so very wonderful. So I'm going to pause there and hand over to Philo. So again, thanks to Philo and the team for helping us put this together. And I'm hoping this is the start of a new set of collaboration between our organizations, and looking forward to greater things in the future. But let's start with what we hear for today. So Philo, over to you for your opening comments, please.
Thank you, Rajneesh. Indeed, it's an honor to be collaborating on this topic, which I think is very, very important for all of us. And I'm really grateful to my colleagues and dear friends, Mr. Bazlur Rahman, all the way, he's joining us from Washington, D.C., and also Martin. Thank you, Martin. I know you've been absolutely busy. It's hard to get you at all. And of course, Rob, I don't know what time it is in Canada, but I know that it's freezing with all the pictures that you send me all the time. So thank you so much. These are the guys, I've not met Vinod, but I think it's really exciting to have so many of you passionate about radio, because radio, as Rajneesh said earlier, all the nice things about radio happens to be the theater of the mind. And I think it will always be that. And Rajneesh, also you said internet is critical. And this is something that we found out during the pandemic. So just imagine the power of having internet, community networks that can actually enhance community radios and help people understand local stories better or get the local stories, especially in the time of the pandemic when we noticed that no one was really able to go out. Imagine if we had community network and community radios could have actually used this to put on Facebook or YouTube or share with broadcasters their stories. It would really have been beneficial. So I hope that Osama, you're doing a great job together with Rajneesh, and I'm so proud and happy to be a part of this conference. Thank you. So it's back to you. Our superstars are going to talk about radio stars, they call it actually. Thank you.
So thanks, Philo. So what and just for the benefit of our panelists, I don't think we want to make this a very formalized session. So let's try and keep it informal, maybe more as a conversation as opposed to, something structured.
Okay.
And so perhaps we could start with some comments from any of you really on what your thoughts are on what we've said thus far between Philo, Osama, and myself. And do you see any future, well, not future, I'm sure you see a future, but what are the synergies that we could leverage and exploit between these two communities?
Maybe I'll Can I jump in first there from Australia, if you don't mind? Thank you, Raj. It's not quite beer o'clock here yet, but getting there soon. And great to be part of this. This is really perfectly timed from an Australian experience as well, not just for COVID, but there's been so much going on in terms of trying to network communities through radio for many years, and there's been a surge in a couple of specific projects in terms of information and content over recent times. And in some of the communities I've been working with, they've struggled to try and connect their communities via internet and by other forms, but some of them have been successful. There's been some examples where it's worked and others where it hasn't worked so well, and they battle great distances and environmental concerns. And I'm talking about remote Indigenous populations and remote communities spread across Australia. There's vast land masses and not many people. So at times it's a funding matter of not having enough funding commitment to try and set up the networks through government or other sources. And at other times it's just a sheer battle against the elements. But community radio in the meantime has tried to build on what's already been there and really tried to work hard on its content and connection to community. And I think that teamed with the explosion in social media, it's sort of ripe for further development in developing further community networks to try and maximise what's there in community feeling and demand for content and connectivity. We've got a long way to go, I think, in Australia.
Thanks, Martin. Vinod?
Thanks, Raj. Thanks to DEF and Internet Society for having me here in this panel. And I'm delighted to see old friends like Bazlur Rahman on the panel. I'm actually coming from a bit of an outsider perspective to some of the debates around community networks. I mean, my work at the UNESCO chair on community media, which I had here at University of Hyderabad, has been to a large extent focused on community radio. In not only in India, but in other parts of South Asia, but also in parts of East and West Africa and so on. But I'm quite, taken by the potential of seeing how community radio could work with the emerging community network landscape, especially in our region. But let me just pull back a little bit, for a minute or two, if you will, to share some perspective on what I think ought to be the basic principles of community communication. I mean, I think we need to keep these principles up front in whatever we do with community networks or trying to merge community networks with community radio. For example, community communication is essentially about horizontal communication. It's about facilitating communication between and among the communities. And if there is a vertical element in the communication, it is more bottom-up than the traditional, top-down mode of communication. Community communication and the infrastructures that come with it, which some of us have been calling the voice infrastructures, need to be accessible, need to be affordable. And these infrastructures should be such that communities should be able to exercise control over the processes of communication away from the patronizing state control, what we in India call the Mai Baap Sarkar. It also needs to move away from the rampages of big corporations, right? So the control needs to be in the hands of communities, right? And the content, very importantly, needs to be in local languages, relevant to local needs, and generated by community producers. So any processes that can transform communities from being passive consumers to becoming active producers is quite a welcome thing, right? And if community networks can further some of this work that community radios are doing, I'm willing to explore that. And the other principle also is that the voices that community communication ought to amplify should be the voices of the most marginalized within the communities. I mean, sometimes we make the mistake of thinking, communities are somehow homogeneous entities, but people living within a geographical area of a network or of a radio station are not necessarily all alike, right? There are hierarchies, gender, class, caste, religion, and so on. And these need to amplify the voices of those who are most marginalized within this community. And finally, we also need a favorable policy environment to enable all of this to happen. I mean, I know that DEF and Internet Society have been doing some work on pushing for a more enabling policy environment for community networks. I mean, here in India, I mean, I don't even know if the government's policy recognizes community networks as a legitimate resource even, right? I mean, so I don't know where to start this policy battle. And I think one of the issues has been, probably Osama and Basubhai will agree with me, one of the main issues in South Asia has been that we have been stuck within a security prism through which we look at everything, right? Right from the early battles of community radio that Basubhai and I have been involved in South Asia from the early 2000s, governments have been very reluctant to open airwaves to communities and mostly hiding behind this perceived threat to the security and sovereignty of the nation and so on. And that's true of most of this region. And when a minister of information and broadcasting had said somewhat in a sort of scared sort of a tone in the early 2000s to me, that what if the airwaves fall into the wrong hands? And this was about 2002 or so, and I said the airwaves have already fallen into the wrong hands. This is about handing over the airwaves to the right hands, which is communities, right? And if you can't trust your own communities with airwaves or with community networks, who else can you trust, right? So I think we need to join hands both in terms of the community radio movements and the community network activity that's now building up in our region, but also it's very prominent in other parts of the global south. We need to join together to make a big policy push to create an enabling environment for this to happen. So let me pause there with this preliminary remarks, and I'll look forward to learning more from all of you about community networks. Thanks, Raj. Yeah.
Thanks, Vinod. And some really good points there that you brought up, and I'm hoping we can dwell into those a little bit more later on. Rob or Basloor, any comments from either of you?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I'm up in northern Canada. I'm in the Arctic. I'm about 2,000 kilometers straight north of Vancouver up by Alaska. And I've been fortunate to be able to travel all across northern Canada working in communications and radio 25 years now. Interesting, I looked up CNCR to get refreshed on it. A little bit of history on the northern part. 25 years ago, connectivity in the north here, the federal government put pockets of money out to support ISPs, internet service providers. Those were sometimes like small community co-ops. They would be a community network, and their goal was to set up internet services in those communities. So 25 years ago, there was over 100 of them, and I worked for one of the largest ones in the Yukon. And now 25 years later, there's 2 of them left, and there's one giant and there's one smaller one, which is in the process of being gobbled up. So all the communication services in Canada's far north, 40% of Canada's land mass is now one phone company, Northwest Health, part of Bell Canada. And the Canadian government has subsidized them huge. But the point that I'm trying to bring across is that all those other community networks are extinct. They're completely gone. And anyhow, that poses some problems with the flow of information. We all in the north here, we have one information provider. Now we do have access to the internet, but it is filtered through that. And community radio has a really big role, to get voices from the communities. And, where I live in Canada, we have lots of Indigenous groups, like we're similar to Australia, the large landmass, large rural areas. The only thing is here it gets to -50. But anyhow, with Indigenous groups, I've been really lucky to work with them. And one of the core things that, I've always been involved with software development, with radio, was in emergency broadcasting, what is relevant for local radio. And people want to know, where is the tornado? Where is the landslide? Where's the flood if you're in Vancouver tonight? And so anyhow, Indigenous communities would be in really remote places, and they would have very expensive satellite bandwidth, especially in the high Arctic, totally ridiculously priced internet services. So where I see community radio has been a really good medium is in the last mile delivery of content. And so some people will use the internet to program some of their radio stuff and create content, and then they'll deliver it through FM radio as the last mile delivery. And everybody's got a car radio, a set of batteries, and an FM radio, so it's cheap and it's accessible. Now, some of the other Indigenous groups that I've worked with are in Southern Canada. And Southern Canada, they have all the modern conveniences typically in the big cities as you'll get in any metropolitan area. But there's lots of rural Indigenous communities. And anyhow, one of them is in Bella Coola, the west coast of Canada, a small community, about 1,000 people. And there they do have community networks. They have co-ops that are formed to provide internet services to the community, and they actually compete with the major providers as well. And what they do is they add value-added service to the last mile to the customer by providing technical support and setup. And anyhow, one of the one First Nation that I worked with, I made them have a really good early partnership with the community network, the ISP. And so I said to the radio station when we were getting it set up, I said, hey, you got to make friends with these guys and open up some dialogue. You can help each other out in lots of different ways. Number one, the ISP has mountaintop sites with power where you can put your transmitter. And so they had different discussions about different things. And one of the things that they would work hand in hand, if there's an internet outage, then the local radio station would be able to provide information to people saying, hey, there was a fiber cut or the solar panel is damaged and stuff. So they had some redundancy in some of their communication stuff. And it's all about local content. That's what's keeping community radio going. Community radio is a growing industry. All the big corporations, they've all gobbled up all the smaller radio stations. So the community stations are thriving. And the last thing I'll say about the North and communications and radio and broadcast, again, I've been 25 years, I've lived in the business, I lived here 40 years. But the other part that happened was we used to have small over-the-air TV stations, and those are completely gone now. And then there was the community channel that was for community groups, nonprofit groups, and now those have disappeared and they've all become corporatized. And so we have to be really, really careful, how some of our freedom of speech can be impeded by the way that it gets containerized in some of these types of things. So, yeah, like I say, community radio is great. I love it. I just go into my car, I turn on the radio and something comes out. I don't need a password. I don't need an account. And, I get to hear what my friends and neighbors are up to. So I'm really interested to hear all the other views and stuff about community radio too. So thanks a lot for having me join.
Thanks, Rob.
Yep, go on, Raj. You're talking already.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that a colleague of mine who's based out of Canada, he's been doing some work with some of the communities up north in the Arctic Circle. And maybe I'll later on, I'll connect you with him, Rob. It may be useful for him to have a chat with him as well.
Yeah, so I think what Rob mentioned about Indigenous groups, this is an exciting way, but he also talked about the death of so many community radios. Now that's pretty sad. So I just want to go back to Mr. Vinod, what Vinod mentioned about the importance of community radios. And I think, Vinod, I was just looking at your book, Other Voices, and why it's so important for community radios to continue to exist. Right. So in Canada, it's a different thing altogether. You're in a very remote area, and definitely, I suppose, community radio plays an important role in areas such as yours, Rob. But to me, as a radio person, I feel that community radios really go to the grassroots. Now, what has happened with all this dying of community radios is because of commercial airwaves that have come forth. Commercial radios, which seem to be coming with new niche broadcasting and so forth. So that's where a lot of radios have died, simply because of lack of commercials, or maybe a lack of, I don't know, maybe the interest at that point. But certainly now, I think it's time to sit back and think about ways that we can revitalize this. So I'd like to move on to the next person. I think, Bazlur, have you spoken yet? Or yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philo. First of all, I would like to provide big thank you to the organizing 5th times Community Network for Social Good. So basically, I very much love this process, and because I learned a lot of things from this community network. Before four conference. So this time I see the major 3 things. One is the last mile access. It is a very, very important. And the second one is the digital exclusion. And third one is the pandemic. Pandemic, I think, in line with the COVID-19. So basically what we are doing regarding the community radio, I fully endorse with Binod views regarding this. So basically what we are doing, basically we are contributing, supplementing to the creating knowledge, preservation of the knowledge, community knowledge, and also disseminating the knowledge, and as well as utilization of the knowledge. So it is very important, and we have some non-negotiable point. Earlier, Binod has already mentioned some couple of area, and I would like to here emphasize, reinforce. There are 4 areas. One is the protecting human rights, is a non-negotiable. Second one is the freedom of expression, and third one is universal access to information and knowledge. It is a very, very important. And fourth one is the earlier you mentioned also respect for cultural and linguistic diversity is very, very important, and quality education for all. But problem is when we started the community radio movement, community radio process in this South Asia, that time there is no new failure and also new technology, and as well as these 2 is very important, new failure and also new technology. So nowadays we are facing lots of impact from the new failure as well as new technology, and these 2 basically they create a big problem to the community radio sector regarding the influencing, amplifying, and also empowering coming to the voice like this. So I feel the community radio is still providing the multi-generation reach, and as well as using multi-platform presence through level of degree new technology, especially social media, and as well as we are trying to enable, that means in line with supply side and as well as demand side, and e-engaging and as well as e-empowering. if we ensure these three things, we need to harmonize with the local new technology, and as well as harmonize with new failure, say like last mile access, digital inclusion, and as well as serving pandemic through of community radio. So the community network is a very, very important area for the community radio, and because without this, we are facing regarding the e-enable, e-engaging, and also e-empowering. So I believe if we include the community network and as well as if we harmonize with new failure and as well as new technology, so that would be very much contribute to e-enabling, e-engaging, and also e-empowering through community radio. Thank you.
Can't hear Philomena.
Yeah, Philo, we can't actually hear you. Philo, can you hear us? We can't quite hear you. You're unmuted, but for some reason there's no audio coming from you.
Yeah, I heard some jitter when she was talking before. Maybe her connection's gone south. I'll just carry on though. Some of the other stuff about Indigenous things, radio that's come up in the last 2 years that I thought would be interesting to pass along to everybody. Again, this is just in Canada, but yeah, I've been interested, especially down in Australia, what's going on there. So anyhow, as some of these Indigenous communities, they're small communities, isolated communities, typically 1,000 people in a community or less. And anyhow, they've been telling me a couple of things. They've been telling me that their local community radio station, their FM radio station, is more valuable for communication than Facebook and all the other social media combined. It's a very, very valuable asset. The other thing that First Nations are trying to do, some of them, is they're trying to get some of their members away from Facebook. Some people say Facebook's just a public sewer and full of trash, and there's some stuff in it, but you know, the trustworthy factor, what are you going to trust, you know, things on Facebook, or are you going to listen to somebody on community radio to a voice that you're familiar with? So anyway, I find that interesting that they're going more towards analog FM radio than some of the newfangled digital stuff. And you know, internet's expensive in all of these communities as well. So it's all about you know, how much it costs and what the access is like. So yeah, what's it like down in your neck of the woods there, Martin?
It's a pretty similar sort of experience, Rob. It's interesting how you described Canada. Australia is very similar to that in terms of the the dynamic of geography and so on. But you're right, the community radio is still highly valued. The networks that are there for First Nations groups are there. They operate in those small communities, and radio is still really important. I was training some young trainees a little while ago, and they were telling me about various social networks that I'd never heard of before. So there's ones that they get into and we'll talk about, but the same thing is they're trying to curb that, I suppose, and curb the, not curb, but making sure the information flowing, particularly in times of COVID, the information flow is valuable information, not thwarting discussion, but making sure the information is credible that's being spread around. So the radio is highly reliable for that. Social media, not so much. And I think one of the schemes that's been tried in some of the communities I've worked with, right in the middle of Australia in the desert, there's a network station there that has a whole range of community FM studios, a part of the network, but at each of those they have a community hub, which is basically a room of computers where people can come in and access local council information or have access to information. I think that's the number one thing, is access in whatever form suits people. Radio is brilliant, but sometimes people want to go a little bit deeper or investigate something. And there's a training program that goes with each of that to give people the skills, because that's the next thing that's maybe lacking, is people don't have the skills because they don't have the exposure, yet they have the need to engage digitally. So I can see lots of similarities between what's happening First Nations communities in Canada and what we've tried to set up in Australia. The last thing I'll say about the Australian experience to date in terms of the content has been this great push towards community journalism. And I think this is where there could be great network sort of connection, where there's a push for creating more local stories, because there's been the loss of newspapers and other local medium, but people still want to tell their stories. The community media training organisation that I do some work for covers the whole of the country. They're rolling out their first community media journalism courses, which is terrific to see. Hopefully it'll lead towards more content that's really about local stories being covered, and that'll fit into the whole network of network and radio as well. So yeah, some good developments there.
So I don't know if we have Philo back yet or not, but Martin and Robin and Bazlur and Vinod, to all of you. So I'm just wondering, I mean, we know what the community radio does, right? So, but how do you see if those community radio networks had the ability to also become internet network providers at the local level, apart from, what it could do for the local community? How about the radio station itself? Could it leverage the internet to provide a different type of service or a better type of service, or enhance their services? Do you see any opportunities there?
Okay, can you guys hear me now? Sorry to ask this most asked question, but I have to. Okay, so basically, this is an interesting question, Raj, that you just threw. Do community radios need to use the same multi-platforms or techniques that are used by a radio? I think radio has developed so much, because I'm a radio person. I was heading radio in Malaysia. And at that time, we were losing out a lot to other mediums. So that's when we realized that we need to leverage on social media. We need to leverage on all the multi-platforms. We need to engage all that. Many years ago, it was just a telephone call to a radio station. But today it's different, because people send you, besides emails, you're having chats. We started having WhatsApp on our radios. So really, it's an exciting time for radio, I would say. And all these new technologies, new innovations that have come on board is really exciting. And I'm sure that all the panelists here today, Rob, Martin, Bazlur, and also Vinod, will tell you how exciting it is. Because I think hand phones are something which is getting very common to be here, at least in this part of Asia. Does anyone want to add on to what I just said? Thank you. Martin or Vinod, you've been very quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to bring the focus back on the community and community networks. Because ultimately, when we are talking about community networks, and at least some of the experts who have done a lot of good work on community networks, when they speak of these networks, they are talking about technology-enabled community networks. But I think it's important to recognize that community networks have always existed prior to technology as a sort of a sociological, anthropological entity, right? With all its diversities and issues and identities. We need to really start from there. I think, when Rob talked about the last mile metaphor, and I think that there is a lot going for that metaphor, and I acknowledge that. But I think it's important to put the last mile first. Rather than thinking about the last mile as something that we think of when it comes to delivery of content, right? I mean, how do we place the needs of the poorest, most marginalized, the indigenous communities that Martin and Rob have been talking about? How do we build comprehensive people-centered, community-led and community-based technology-enabled networks, right? So these need to build on already existing sort of sociologically, anthropologically existing community networks. And it is these networks, let me tell you, that came in really handy during the last couple of years of the pandemic. Not so much the technologies. Many communities cut off from the internet, from social media and so on, not only relied on their community radios for information, for sharing of issues and perspectives, but on the social solidarities that these communities have with among each other. I mean, in spite of things like physical distancing, which is completely antithetical to the participatory logic of community radios, right? I mean, what is community radio, with a social distancing norm, right? So many of these communities actually visited each other, reached out with food and, basic necessities. I think this is the stuff of communities and community solidarities. How do we build from here to a technology-enabled community networks is what we need to think about. The one brief point I think Philomena had raised earlier about the threat posed by the expanding commercial radios to community-driven radio stations. The threat is not so much from commercial radio stations, Philomena, at least in our part of the world, in India or Bangladesh. I mean, community radios are catering to people down the long road of development, where they are cut off from a lot of development, but also communication and information. Commercial stations are not really interested in going there. As stations driven primarily by advertising, these are the wrong audiences to advertise for. I mean, what will they buy, right? So they're not going there to these remote rural areas, to indigenous communities and so on. And that is where we need community radio. And that is where we need to explore how we can leverage community networks to build on what community radios are already offering, to strengthen that community solidarity.
Well said, Vinod. I do agree with you. Each country has a different context, doesn't it? So when you look in the context of India or really remote societies, definitely they don't have business there, at least commercial radios. But I think to get to your question, right, we really need to look at community radios per se, community radio operators such as Buzzlure or even Rob, to really look at as to the identity and to whom you're actually broadcasting and for what, right? So if I look at what Vinod has just said, if you're looking at the really poverty-ridden people, reaching out to that grassroots level and letting people be aware, what is your motive? Are you just there to give them some education or to teach them about agriculture or to just to listen to their voices? Perhaps we have to look at the role of these radios. If you look at India or you look at Indonesia, in Malaysia, we don't have community radios. But I just want to share something very interesting that happened during the pandemic in Papua New Guinea. So Papua New Guinea, they have so many islands, and they faced a huge problem, especially during COVID-19. And nobody could actually give them the information. They were not getting information. Someone came to town and then they saw that, oh my God, it's empty, there's a lockdown. So there was completely no idea of what was happening in the world, because everyone would agree that we were facing empty streets. So then again, this is where people realized that they did not have internet. So they didn't know what on earth was happening. They had no access to anything. So how do you really go back to this? So radio operators, what they did was they quickly set up some kind of tower so they could reach out to these small remote communities. But then it was a bit too late. So if only we had things like community network, it would have enabled people to understand and not be cut off from society, cut off from the world, right? I had one practitioner who told me that when she was in such a situation, She had to go up to a very high place where there was some connectivity or some signal strength to actually reach out and get some idea of what's happening around her. So these are some of the challenges. So to me, I feel that coming back to where Raj was mentioning, and also Osama, keeping the topic back to community networks, I think in today's world, community network is important. And commercial radios or even traditional government radios or whatever radios, they're all using this. We're all leveraging on Facebook or whatever other YouTube, because today radio has gotten visual. It's no more just sound only. Many years ago, we only looked at sound only medium, right? Of course, it's exciting. We all had to have golden voices when we were on radio. But today, people want to see how Raj looks like, or who is Philo, or who is Vinod. We always Google immediately, right? If I just Google Vinod to see who he is, and immediately I get a whole list of books that he wrote. So that's the kind of society we live in, and everyone, we can blame it on media. You can just blame it on the way the world goes, but everyone is like that. So I think community networks are very important, and they're actually a great way to let people know what's happening. And we cannot keep people in that remote scenario any longer, with just AM transmitters. We need to have people connected, and I think connectivity is so important. An important thing that it's a necessity, right? It's no more just what do you call that, a fashion or a luxury. Thank you.
Yeah, Philo, I would like to add something with your point. There are 3 points. One is very recent from Bangladesh, we are learning from the international broadcaster. So international broadcaster like BBC, Voice of America, and Deutsche Welle. Earlier, they have a very vibrant program, Bangla program for the Bangla community people. But reality is, finally, the Voice of America and Deutsche Welle, German, finally they stopped their Bangla program. And nowadays, they are contacting with the local television channel for their level of degree program broadcasting. And BBC also shrinking from the Bangladesh. And I think very soon they will stop the Bangla program. And again, they will already contact with the local television. Okay, one thing. Second thing is, people earlier listening radio through radio set as a receiver. Nowadays, they are listening radio program through mobile set. So this is from the community radio, community people side, there is a technological changes already happen regarding the radio set replaced by the cell phone. And third one is the radio format. It's a very challenging area. Earlier, we have a very long radio format, but nowadays we need a very short format of the radio program because people's listening radio through mobile set. And final one is at any way, our policymaker basically shifted attention radio to television and as well as new media also. So this is a couple of points I would like to add your comments. Thank you.
I think that's an important point, Basler, that do we have radio sets available nowadays for community radio people to even listen to? Yeah, so how do people listen?
Listen, mobile set, through mobile cell phone set, mobile set.
So isn't there a need for community networks to be enhanced then? Simply because I myself can't find a radio set. I listen to radio on my handphone, or we have it on television in Malaysia. Astro channels, they have all the radio stations. So that's how we listen, or on my laptop. So the important question here is, if we don't get radio sets, a radio would slowly disappear. So what are we talking about? Community radios, or even any kind of radio for that matter. It all goes back to connecting on a mobile, a laptop, or what other new technology has come up with, what other devices that we have. So it's really a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rob, you're very quiet with too many devices behind you.
Osama, I see your hands up, and maybe this is also a good time for you to do the next segment as well, right?
No, I just wanted to make a point and also ask, because in this group, it's dominated by the radio players and the people who have the idea about community radio and its reach. And what a quote, Philomena, you had. This is like quote of the month. You know, radio is becoming visual. That's like amazing. That's like that should be the headline of a newspaper, you know, saying that radio is becoming visual. Anyway, so I wanted to make 3 points. What we have gathered, because recently we also did community radio event in India among the community radios. And what I'm seeing is 3 scenarios. One scenario, community radio operators are using internet to enhance their reach. That's number 1 scenario. You know, they are not bothered whether there is, they need to propagate internet, but they're using internet, whatever is available, in whatever way it is available, whether it's WhatsApp, connectivity, SMS, call on phone in call, and so on and so forth. So one scenario is community radio using internet to enhance their reach, their perspective, their content, their context, and everything. The second scenario is that there are internet and there are no radios. Okay. So, and the reason I'm trying to highlight is that they are suffering from misinformation. You know, the third scenario is internet is there, radio is there, but internet is not using radio. They are available. So the reason I'm saying is that there are many, many places in India's all the 200 or 300 locations where community radio is available. Partially there is internet, but those internet guys are not coming to community radio to ask, can you broadcast this content? Can you do this? Can you do that? That's also not happening. So we are not taking responsibility of the contextualization and usage of each other. And that is what this platform is about. You know, so the expectation is that can CR in one way or the other become a tool or a catalyst to reach more through internet, which Philomena was saying that don't we need internet? We do, you know, so we need to reach more. But more than that, in the coming time, if not now, I see that internet has been suffering because of its proliferation of uncontrolled content propagation without local contextualization. And internet is the biggest source of misinformation propagation because of various tools available on internet. Radio is still not, I've never heard anybody blaming that radio is proliferating misinformation. Or radio, I mean, at the worst, you can maybe claim that they are biased to government, they are sold out to government, they are voice of somebody, voice of somebody. But we are still not there where we can claim that the media, radio as a media, is responsible for hate and, you know, misinformation and so on and so forth. And therefore, I see internet need more radios and more radio perspective from the perspective of reliable propagation of content. And maybe on this, maybe you can spend another 5 minutes, then I will take to the second session. Philomena can anchor that.
I think, Shama, your points are very well taken. You know, internet may well need radio, but, you know, we do need to acknowledge that many radio stations also need the internet.
Yes,
to do their work more effectively, especially in a policy context where community radios are allowed very low power transmitters to reach to their audiences. I mean, in India, it's a 50-watt transmitter, like a 10 to 15 kilometer radius, which is not bad. I mean, given the density of the population, 10 to 15 kilometer radius reaches a number of people. But if the terrain is not great and so on, it doesn't reach even those 10, 15 kilometers. Now, if they want to go beyond that, right, what do you do? And like Bazlubhai pointed out, many people would want to use their mobile phones to listen to the radio. So one, the network required to be able to do that. And secondly, at the production transmission end, to be able to stream your broadcast, right? You also need reliable internet connectivity, right? I mean, that's where I think this idea of community network, sounds like an absolute necessity to work in tandem with community radios. I mean, Osama, you guys have worked on issues of spectrum allocation in India, but the entire process of spectrum allocation is so opaque, completely mired in auctions and the big players participating. So spectrum availability for communities is rapidly becoming a mirage. I mean, there is a vanishing spectrum for communities, right? Especially for the benefit of those in remote rural areas. Yeah, how do we leverage our collective advocacy efforts to ensure that there is spectrum available for communities, right? For community networking as well as for broadcasting, right? We need both. And one other policy, push, if you permit me, Osama, is to repeat what we have done in another forum recently. How can we leverage the Universal Service Obligation Fund to be able to reach the unconnected, the disconnected in remote rural areas more effectively? In India, I'm told the Universal Service Obligation Fund is now something to the extent of 60,000 crores. I don't know what millions of dollars it translates to, but it's a huge fund which we are sitting on and barely spending from there. Yeah, if we can advocate for spending a little portion of the USOF, which is coming as a result of levies imposed on telecom operators, can we not, seed community networks more effectively to enhance the capabilities of community radios and for community radios to work more effectively with internet-based networks, right? I mean, so these are the two sort of policy things I would like to place on record now, Osama. One is about a more transparent spectrum allocation, a clear reservation of spectrum for communities, and expenditure from the USOF funds to facilitate community networks. I think these are a couple of the policy issues I want to place on record here.
On the issue of USF, the Universal Service Obligation, it does strike me that if community radio and community network promoters were to work together, I think there'd be a greater momentum to justify why it's needed, right? Because both are equally important, as we have learned from decades of doing this. Yeah.
Agreed, Raj, because if you want to get anything, I think there need to be synergy nowadays. And one thing this pandemic has taught us is that we really have to work together. So you're right in saying that if you put up a case as to why, because community radios have always worked independently. I think when I was in Australia, the very good example of just seeing a small van which is operating a community radio in a little district, and I was like, what is this? When I was there, it really caught my attention. That's how people are operating. They're just interested in a little bit of a revenue that comes in, and then tell people what's happening around you, traffic, these kind of ideas. But we really need to look at how we can engage people at a greater level. I just want to share one thing with all of you before we move on. We had a talk, or we did a program with Koreans. Korea does not have any community radio. But one of the persons who were involved in remote broadcasting, they brought out a very interesting point, saying that the thing that can give a challenge to even OTT or to any kind of traditional media is community radio. It's because people would tire off all these OTT platforms, mini dramas or whatever stories that go on. What people really want to know is what other people are going through or what they're doing. So the stories of the community and getting and empowering communities to be involved, to share these stories, and community radios becoming community televisions, perhaps. This is perhaps the way forward. for the entire media industry, especially where community radio is concerned. We're looking at the prospect of making it more visual. Sorry, I have to say this again, but I think community radios also operating as community visual operators is also important. And this is where internet can play a role, because you can put it on your own digital platforms. Everyone knows the popularity of digital YouTube and so forth. So this is where we can actually explore new ideas so that radio lives on. Otherwise, we will face these challenges. And to answer Vinod on spectrum, I think even traditional radios or televisions or whatever, we are all facing a big problem of spectrum space. So I think we are championing this with the ITU. The ITU is taking this up, and we see a lot on the chat on ITU as well. So yeah, perhaps this fund needs to be talked about more, Raj and the rest of the team, so that something can be done towards community radio and connectivity. Yeah, would anybody else like to say something? Yeah, Baslu.
I would like to add one thing with you. You know, but traditionally South Asian country, especially Bangladesh, we have a compartmental department. Say like Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, they do not look after the internet. And on the other hand, ICT Ministry look after the internet, but they have no area look after the broadcasting. So even they have no minimum coordination also. So so when the ICT Ministry doing something, always they keep in mind regarding ICT, blah, blah, and other thing. And nowadays, you know, emerging technology also are now under consideration. So like artificial intelligence. So they are thinking now AI, blockchain like this, big data like this. But our Ministry of Information basically lag behind level of degree regarding the exercising like this. And on the other hand, Post and Telecom Ministry has a, Vinod raised this very important thing, lots of money they have, but within the ministry level, we have no coordination. So my proposal is, because AIBD is administered the one of the focal of the Ministry of Information, say like this. So when you organize any ministerial meeting, side by side, we would be very happy if you invite the Post and Telecom and also ICT Minister along with the Information and Broadcasting Minister. That would be very helpful for any type of solution regarding the community broadcasting matter.
Okay, point taken, Basur. I think you're right. Like, for instance, even in Malaysia, we have MCMC. So they take care of, although they're under the same ministry, but rarely do people talk about spectrum space or connectivity in the context of traditional radio or television. So this is something that we really, really need to get going. Perhaps in the coming up conference, we are inviting ministers from across Asia Pacific. So you can also bring this up and we will explore this together. Thank you.
I'll just jump in if I have a second. So the Indigenous groups, I work with one central British Columbia rural place, and anyhow, we set up what's called a makerspace for them, and that was a place where people could come in and use tools and build things. So the whole concept was that we would set a makerspace up, and we would train people how to do some of the basic things in the radio, some of the IT hands-on skills, and the hook. What would attract them was, hey, you could be on the radio, you could do something, but really what we wanted to find was some of that talent that could do some of the IT stuff. So when we built 6 radio stations, they networked them all together along Highway 20, around 500-kilometer long road. And so they have a central DJ play studio in the downtown Williams Lake area, and they can send out announcements to all those 6 communities in the Chilcotin language. And some of the people that have have come through the door now have gone on to do IT work, network administration, web page development, stuff that nation needed in-house. So the IT skills, very, very important. You can't do the stuff without the IT skills. You know, everything's all built on standards. You know, TCP/IP, it's the backbone language of the internet. So we're converging all together. Media, radio, TV, video, YouTube, it's all turning into a big stream of ones and zeros, TCP/IP, whatever. It's all digital, ones and zeros. FM radio 20 years from now, you won't even be able to buy an FM radio. They won't even make it. It's like going out and buying a VHS tape. You know, hey, I love radio. I love old radios, but you know, I love the nostalgia. But 20 years from now, you know, nobody's going to make them. China's not going to make them. We talk about what type of protocols we're going to have. You know, streaming radio, DAB plus, DRM, the whole bunch of them. Everybody's already got the receiver in their pocket. That's the thing right now. It's called a smartphone. You can receive an MP3 stream or an audio stream. And, you know, there's a bit of caution about all the spectrum allocation. Yeah, that's happening in Canada too. United States, you can't get an FM radio frequency in Toronto, Vancouver, any of the big markets. They're completely bought out. And the big corporations and conglomerates are buying up all the spectrum. They've taken analog TV off of the air, and they've turned that into cell phone frequencies and auctioned all that off. Opaque, that would be a clear day in Canada. But anyhow, you know, there's a thing that we have to be very careful about. And one of the things that community radio, the hook is that it's run by the community and it's an independent voice. And you know, when the power goes out, the community radio is still going on the air. We have to be very careful, though, that we don't embed all of our systems and become so reliant on the internet and on like one single provider, because if that one single provider says, I don't want you on the air, then they just go unplug and you're off the air. So, you know, that's the one bit of caution. We have to be able to make sure that there's still a place in the spectrum and in the ether for community radio. Otherwise, what's going to happen is like in the Yukon, the experience we have up in the north here. Yes, you can do streaming. Yes, you can do video. You can do all this stuff, but you got to pay, and you got to pay in advance. And you know, the community radio all of a sudden becomes non-viable. You know, the issue that happens in Canada here, surprisingly, with the one monopoly company up here, they have to provide wholesale internet access, and they're obliged to by our regulator. And yes, they do provide wholesale access. The only problem is they charge 20 times more for the wholesale access than their retail access. So if you want to be a competitor, you have to pay 20 times what they're going to sell it for on retail. And that is why we have zero competitors in the north here. And community radio has a very big role in all of this, because the commercial stuff that you hear all across Canada, you can get in your car, you can drive 5,000 kilometers, you can listen to every FM radio station. There's thousands of commercial transmitters and they all sound the same. You go from one city to another and it's like exactly the same programming, and it is the same program. It's all out of one central place now. So the community stuff you're talking about, yeah, people want to hear something different. That is the thing. Content is king. That's the value for community radio.
So I think this is a good point in time, Osama, to give examples of what is possible with community networks and community radio. I believe we have a couple of examples that we've done in India. Do you want to do that now? Because
yes,
we are.
Yes, so I think I have about 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, I have 2 sets of slides and 2 videos, but it should not take more. I supposed to be allocated 20 minutes, but we'll try to finish it in 15 minutes so that we can have a discussion. None of you are allowed to go away. Yeah, so Jenny or Sheil, can you put up a slide? Raj and Philomena, I will put some slides in the beginning to show overall examples of various things, and then a couple of videos. So we are talking about community radio and community networks, what we have done in the last, if not more than a decade, but certainly under a decade in various parts of India. And in propagation, Buzzlure will also be example that we reached out to Bangladesh as well to conduct training related to CN, and we did something. So next slide, please. These are a few photos of Barefoot College. Raj has visited this place where there is a community radio as well as community network. Next, please. Yeah, next. So these are again some common, can you, yeah. So these are some commonalities, total 329 community radios that in India we have. It's very interesting to note that 166 run by NGOs, 21 by Krishi Vigyan Kendra, which is basically a agricultural cohort run by government, and about 164 educational institutions. And there are 300 plus community networks in India. I mean, almost 200 plus are being run by DEF and ISOC's effort. So there is a lot of learning. It's not that few numbers that we are talking about, both the numbers are in hundreds, even though in India, nothing in 100 is anywhere closer to the masses. Next. We have common infrastructural way of looking at it. One, I mean, there are common towers. We can use towers because they both broadcast. We have content studios, we have HR, we have infra, regulations, and then you have access technology in both the cases. Both use Wi-Fi technically, and they both are also adaptive to each other's regulation. There are new regulations that have come which actually liberalizes the licensing of community networks or the internet services, which actually enables it. So there is a possibility to create it more entrepreneurial and things like that. Can we create, like the way there are community radio, can we create local telcos, local ISPs, who can marry with community radio? These are some common. Next. Next screen, please. Are we frozen? Okay, so potential is that if there are 329 community radios, can we have 329 plus community networks? Can we cover more 10 square kilometers area? Can we go to agriculture area to create this? Can we go to the educational sectors to do this? Can we use 320 towers created by community radio as an additional telco infrastructure to propagate internet in those areas? That's very important because we talk about sharing infrastructure, So those are the potential that we are talking about in numbers. And therefore, what Vinod said, we can go back with these statistics to the ITUs of the world and the telecom organization to the world that we should not get rid of these potentials. They are already there. All we need is a little more money to do this, So next, please. So these are some photos, examples that I have written. We have written in many, many newspapers that how community radio matters, how community radio empowers, and these are photos. And these are literally work on the ground. As you can see, we are working on with towers. As you can see, these studios are set up with less than a few $100, using egg trays and all that to create acoustics. And you can see that how community is broadcasting and things like that. So there is a frugality also in this entire thing. Next, please. So, and then where are the potential? Potential is Indonesia is one of the largest community radio adda. Nepal is one of the biggest. Bhutan has got significant. Bangladesh has got very good. Bazlur is sitting here. And I hope he doesn't stay back longer in DC to, leave his country behind with just having few radio stations. So, and then you have the entire African countries as a potential, and now we have AIBD. So we can literally talk about scaling up, making it big, looking big, because we must understand that half the world which is not connected are all community driven. That's very, very important that we know, we must know. Next. So I think that's all in this presentation, actually. We have a video that we recently did. I mean, we have done many of those work, like Barefoot College we did. We did many other. We have one recently done. If I can ask Jenny and Pranita to show a video film, if it works. We have always failed to broadcast video on this Zoom channel, but let's try it today if it is possible.
ಹಾಯ್ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ಎಂಜಾಯ್ ತುಂಬಾ ಎಂಜಾಯ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಸ್ಕೂಲಲ್ಲಿ ಸೋರದ ಮೇಲೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ನಮಗಿದು ಹೆಮ್ಮೆಯ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ ಚಪ್ಪಾಳೆ.
Many people would be having ambition of starting their own community radio station, and the licensing and regulation and policy as a restrict or a barrier for them. So here we are trying to set up a van with Wi-Fi devices which are available around us to build a small community network in small villages. Through that they can start their own community radio also.
Radio. Nevi kelta irodu nam school radio.
So this was the example of moving community radio, which is from the southern part of the country in Karnataka, which we all did together, at the time of pandemic. This person who creates a local Wi-Fi wherever goes and creates broadcasting within the community through that setup using Bluetooth, creating localized Wi-Fi without internet. So it's it's the intranet. It's more like a Wi-Fi intranet, but creating audio connectivity within the area and take announcements like COVID fighting and things like that. We have more traditional example, which I can request Jenny if you can show, that we just recently did about 70 kilometers from Delhi in a place called Noo, where there is a video. If we delay, I can also do another example. Jenny, please let me know.
Playing it.
Yeah.
सुनते रहिए अपना कम्युनिटी रेडियो सिर्फ 90.4 FM पर।
यह कार्यक्रम डिजिटल एम्पावरमेंट फाउंडेशन के सहयोग से रेडियो मेवात पर प्रसारित किया जा रहा है।
सर हमें यहाँ पे DEF ने नेट प्रोवाइड किया है गांव के लिए। गांव पहाड़ की तलहटी में है, जिससे नेट बहुत कम आता था हमारे यहाँ पे। तो DEF ने हमारे यहाँ पर एंटीना से नेट प्रोवाइड किया है। गांव के लोगों को काफ़ी इसका फ़ायदा हुआ है।
वहीं पर हम जो स्टूडेंट थे, घर पर भी इतना ज़्यादा फ़ोन हमको मिलता नहीं है पापा की तरफ से, पर जब से DEF यहाँ पर आया, DEF ने यहाँ पर हमको नेट दिया है। हम यहाँ पर कुछ समय के लिए आते हैं और अपने स्कूल का जो काम है वो यहाँ से नेट के जरिए हम वो सॉल्व कर लेते हैं।
मैं हूँ आपका दोस्त सौरभ खान, और साथियों आपके लिए आज के कार्यक्रम में हम जानेंगे डिजिटल साक्षरता मिशन के बारे में। आज हमारे साथ हैं डिजिटल एम्पावरमेंट फाउंडेशन के डिजिटल साक्षरता मिशन के बारे में विस्तार से बताने के लिए प्रोजेक्ट एग्जीक्यूटिव तो जनाब स्वागत है आपका आज के इस कार्यक्रम में रेडियो मेवात 90.4 FM पर।
हम सभी लोग जानते हैं कि देश भर में लोगों को डिजिटल साक्षरता बनाने के लिए एक मिशन की शुरुआत की गई है और उस मिशन का नाम है राष्ट्रीय डिजिटल साक्षरता मिशन। इसके तहत क्या है कि 14 से 60 साल की जो एज उम्र के जो बीच के जिनकी उम्र है उनको साक्षर करने के लिए, पढ़े लिखे बनाने के लिए इंटरनेट के साथ कंप्यूटर और स्मार्टफोन कैसे ऑपरेट किया जाता है इसकी ट्रेनिंग दी जाती है।
So, if you can all hear me, in both these videos, you may have seen that the two gaps that I was highlighting is that if there is a radio, can you use internet? And if there is an internet, can you use the radio, for vice versa, for complementing each other, empowering each other, reaching more people and contextualizing. You can easily see, and all these radio stations, we know this, very much aware of their existence already. So it's not like we have created a new radio station, not at all. They are there, we have, worked with them. And at the same time, we are asking them to reach to those people where even with community networks, we can't reach in terms of mobilization, in terms of bringing them in one platform and so on and so forth. So these are, and two examples we included, and there are two more, is because one south from one north is also because, the spread can be seen from the perspective that even if we go to, let's say, Sri Lanka tomorrow, or, on Bangladesh, on the other side, we can literally contextualize. One more example I want to give, which is very, very recent, where with the help of ISOC as well as APC, primarily APC, we developed a chatbot. And then we complemented that WhatsApp chatbot along with community radio to fight misinformation. So do we have that couple of slides that we were talking about? And then with that, I will just end my sharing of the cases and if there is any question on that. So next, please. Yeah. So this is, we called it DREAM, Developing Rural Ecosystem Against Misinformation. But we also realize is that radio is a very, very strong community-oriented medium, which is reliable. And we all also know that at the time of pandemic, misinformation was flourishing like anything. It became faith and so on and so forth. Literally people's life in the remote area was very, very difficult. Next, please. So what we did is, in this case, we used WhatsApp. In India, WhatsApp reach is extremely high, and it is also a platform which is used for misinformation. So that's the reason we thought that we will use this as a platform to fight it also. Next, please. One more less, the previous one. Yeah, next now, thanks. Next, please. Yeah, so this is the most important diagram. Misinformation is a problem. What could be the solution? Reaching out to the people, but how do you bust the myth, which is community radio usage? But then how do you use it in such a way that you do the broadcast, but at the same time you propagate the usage of chatbot for allowing people to ask questions regularly, that what is misinformation, what is fake news, so that we can reply to you. So community radio is for broadcasting, mobilization, reach out, but chatbot is for contextually replying constantly as like call-in facility for giving you a question and answer whenever you want it. So that's broadly is the way it was designed. And this chatbot is available, for that matter, if Bazlur wants to use it for all the community radio reach out in your area, we will be happy to give it to you. We'll be happy to give to any of the people that this chatbot is available to do the fighting misinformation. Next, please. And there are few photos that is from the ground that one can see. And by the way, none of this is very easy, let me tell you, especially in that, listening is the most easy part. Listening is the most easy part, but letting them know how to use in a most illiterate area. But still, we have been trying. We reached out to 3,000 rural households, touched 15,000 people, and not 15,000 household, and then about 150,000 people. With this one, we are trying to propagate it with Telegram also, but let's see. So thanks. And we also created a research outcome of this. So I can also share with you the research outcome, that how it really worked out and how did it really impact. So that if any of you want to use this, this is of course available for everyone. We can share with you. So Raj and Philomena, that's all from my side in terms of sharing, but I will be very happy to reply any question.
Thanks, Osama. And I think from what we've seen on those couple of presentations, there are obviously possibilities, there are synergies, but I think it also has to be contextualized to the local needs, right? So in this instance, what we saw was that, there were certain needs that were being met for the local community with what's been done. So, I really think that there is an option, or there's the possibility to replicate this, but we can't boilerplate these examples either, right? It has to be to local circumstances to suit whatever the local community needs and wants. So I believe we had a couple more speakers who are going to join us for this final session. Jenny, do we have them on board?
Mr. Balkrishna Pokhrel will join us shortly because he's traveling. Otherwise, the rest of the people we have. Yeah.
Okay, so we can just roll with this Philo then, and then Balkrishna can join you.
All right. Thank you, Raj. I think, Osama, thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting and insightful. Very interesting to see how DEV's initiative has created such kind of wonders with Radio Mewar. And I also want to touch on what you brought out towards the end on disinformation. Now, that's a huge thing. During the pandemic, we saw that there was something called infodemic, an overflow of information on the pandemic, and not all these information was accurate. So people were actually suffering with a lot of that. So that was one of the greatest problems I think everyone faced, governments faced, communities faced, was how do you bust those mythbusters? I think we had this case in Bhutan, in very, very remote areas where people had COVID, someone traveled, they came back, they never reported. These things were kept undercover because people thought it was just nothing. So we had to work with organizations in Bhutan, ITU especially. They were quite keen in busting the myths of whatever happened during the pandemic, the infodemic. So this is very important, and community radios can play an important role, but more studies need to be done in this area. Right? The mythbusters or busting the fake news. Raj, I think we're joined by Naveed, and Naveed has joined us. So perhaps you can introduce. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So Naveed's with the Internet Society, and he looks a lot after our work regarding networks, community networks, as well as the other internet networks that exist around the region. And of course, he and I have done some work in Pakistan over the years on this as well. And just recently, he's been doing another project looking at a farming community, as it were. And this is the interesting thing about community networks, I think. There's always a local use case, right? So we've done the examples that Osama showed you before that we've done in India, but in Pakistan, we had a different use case. But in all of these, I think there is a common thread that if we're able to also empower the community radio community around that as well, there are some great synergies there. So anyway, enough from me. I think we've all had me speak too much. So Naveed, what are your thoughts and comments?
Thanks, Raj, and hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. And I think on the community network side, absolutely spot on. I think to me, the community networks are more of a local network, and they do things that internet is not able to do. And that's from my experience. We have been talking with young schoolgirls and boys in Pakistan, and when we ask them a simple question, in most cases, what is internet for them? we get an answer, Google, Facebook, or YouTube. And whenever I hear that answer, it really, makes me like, oh no, this is totally wrong. We are going totally on a wrong side of telling our young generation what internet is all about. It's not YouTube, Facebook, or Google as such. It's much more beyond that. And I think that's the space where, in my experience, community networks and community radios have played their part, and they will continue to play their part. They bring that local context, so this network that Raj was telling, we are specifically focusing on farmers only. We're telling them nothing but only what is digital agriculture and how internet can bring more better production to their crops, and what techniques and technologies they can opt using the internet. So that's I think that's a greater benefit of community radios and community network when I see it. Talking about how they do marry each other, they do join hands. To me, there are 4 different elements of it. The first one is community mobilization. I think that's where it's very important that both community networks and community radios are joining hands to make sure that community are mobilized. And let me just tell you, there is so much of thirst and there is so much of passion. It's just that how you reach to that community. Honestly, people like me who have been always living in an urban place in Pakistan, Islamabad, we tend to think that people in the rural places are not very, innovative. They are not very intelligent. But this myth has totally been broken by what I have seen when I have met those communities, and when we have given them the option to connect to themselves. In Pakistan, a lot of the networks that we've been working, people have their own electrician, their own local person who is deploying a network. And I'm like, yesterday there was a network that we were deploying in Nepal. They had to climb up on a pole, and they didn't have the ladder, so the ladder was short enough to reach to the pole height so they can put in the antenna. So what the community did, they brought local woods and they joined the woods with a cloth to extend the ladder. And I got this photo yesterday, and I was like, this is amazing. This is the frugal innovation. It's just that how we give the opportunity. The second part is infrastructure. And I think Usama was spot on with saying that infrastructure sharing is another key element where community networks and community radio come together and help each other to make things go to the next level. The third part, which is more important to me, is content. What I was just hearing about the community radio videos that Usama was showing, people were speaking in Hindi, people were speaking in local language. And that's always been a problem when we see a broader side of internet. 80% of the content comes in English. But when we talk about our local population, how much of them or how many of them understand English? Perhaps less than 15% or 20% per max in rural population. So I think that's to me is a very important element where the content gap could be filled through both community radio and community network. We talk with the people in their own language. And when you talk with people in their own language, that is when you really get the results that you're looking for. So I think these are the few elements. And of course, the fourth one is promotion, how community radios can promote community networks and vice versa, how community networks can promote community radios. So Raj, I'll stop here. I think these were some of the starting point that I wanted to put there.
Thanks, Naveed. So perhaps some of our CR practitioners on the call may have some reactions to what you've seen and heard. Any thoughts on what synergies we could further explore?
Yes. I have a 4-point agenda. Number one is now time to act for all community radio people to rebranding themselves as a community visual radio, because community radio is the yesterday word. Now internet, new flair, new technology is available in the community. So now time to act to rebranding ourselves as a community visual radio. When we argue with the policymaker always question us, who are listening the community radio? when we are talking, okay, it is not only community radio now, it's a visual radio. Then they try to convince level of degree. Okay, community radio now using the social media like this. Okay, number one. Number two is reskilling and upskilling is a very important for our community radio broadcasters. So when we introduce the internet as our one of the enabler, last mile solutions, say like internet using, there are 3 areas. The conference theme, last mile access, digital exclusion, and also addressing the pandemic. Then we need to reskilling and upskilling ourselves. It is very, very important. And it is very, very important for ourselves also revisiting our radio format, because our radio format basically may be discovered by 40 years ago, 50 years ago, but it is a reality now. People are listening, community people are listening radio through a mobile set, so that they need a small format and also very attractive format. So we need ourselves urgently reskilling and upskilling, and also revisit the traditional format. And last one is, we are the backbencher, but our community people also first bencher, because you know, when community people go to the marketplace, they are buying fish, they are buying some vegetable, they are buying some rice, and now they are buying some MB, 10 taka, 15 taka, 20 taka MB. So MB now in their market list. So this is the reality of the community people. And I would like to fully endorse Navid Haq comments, because now community people, community radio broadcasters are the backbencher. Our listeners also the forefront. They are doing they are exercising a new technology. They are exercising a MB culture. That's all. Thank you.
Can I come in for a bit?
Osama, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think, Bazlur's points are quite heartening and also very challenging to the traditional thought process, because in every sector and every industry, traditional thought process actually either makes you drown or fighting it makes you go forward. For example, Kodak is closed forever, who invented digital photography. They're themselves gone. They invented digital photography, and they couldn't survive themselves because they couldn't know how to use that digital photography itself. They got stuck on camera, just on, and the making reels and films and things like that. So when Bazlur said about visual radio, I'm not saying that radio should be changed and all that, but we all know that there are internet radios. They don't take any license from anyone for broadcasting. YouTube has got one of the biggest community-based broadcasters all over the world. They don't take license with anyone. Now, in India, some singular person is broadcasting equivalent to all the community radio stations in the whole country, as well as the radio stations in the whole country. That's second. The third is, even among the community radio players, the other day when in the conference, Vinod is gone, but Vinod was there present. Some of our community radio people are saying that we have a studio, we have broadcasting, we have content, but we have no listeners, because there is no one which is having radio sets, because radio set is gone from the people. The third is, even if people have, they don't know how to repair. There is nobody to repair them. So they either listen on mobile, which works only within a specified kilometers of area, because mobile receiver of radio is not very powerful to receive it in 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers, right? So that's the big issue. The receiving of radio broadcasting or wave on your mobile phone works apparently in a very close area, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers, but not beyond that, unless you have a very special receiver in your mobile. That's the reason why people are very comfortable listening in the car, but not in mobile. But because car receiver is more powerful. So considering that community radio itself is hopping for survival, they are using internet to reach more people. Most of the community radio stations have developed a special app to get it downloaded so that people can download. Most of the community radio operators have converted all their audio broadcast into a small files, and they send it through WhatsApp as an audio file. Most of them has developed podcast, to reach out to global audience and not only local audience. So that means what is important is the content and broadcasting. And it is not about whether you need license or whether you don't need license, or whether you are using particular airwave or not particular airwave. For example, me and Raj worked on how to bypass the regulation in India. We immediately figured out 2.4 and 5.8 is free. So just use that. You don't have to go into the licensing process. Okay. Then we figured out, okay, these equipments are allowed, these equipments are not allowed. Then we started looking at who sells this equipment so that we don't bypass. Then we started figuring out towers. Then it said that more than 100 meters, more than 100 feet or 53-meter tower is not allowed. Then we started looking for building. Okay. If the building is already 15 floor, you don't need tower at all. So natural heights. Then and then there are many more ways of doing frugality and bringing and all that. So what I am actually trying to say is that it's time that we figure out that we have a huge population, huge infrastructure, huge broadcasting and content creators are there. It is important, how do we not vanish just because we are holding the string of using one broadcasting radio frequency wave, and only that way is the broadcasting. No, not at all. We are making content. When we are using our mic, we just have to put a camera in front of us so that we are in video also. So you have a YouTube channel of audio and video both, or for that matter, a podcast channel parallelly with so these are some of the very important issues that only we can work. Let me tell you, the operators cannot work. I mean, it is really not their responsibility. We are associations. We are the people who are into the top level of negotiation, discussion, advocacy, activism. Only we can take this responsibility and in some cases save the radio, in some cases save it in such a way that it merges into the future of the world.
Osama, to that point, I really think that there's also, I think, a need to educate or create awareness among some of these very local, very remote, if you will, CR operators that, these are the possibilities, right? A lot of them, at least from some of the communities that I have interfaced with in past times, they're so local in their approach that they don't realize, there's a larger world out there that could actually make use of some of their content. I mean, as an example, as you know, I like Qawwalis and all that, and there's some parts of South Asia where there's some very unique music that is created, right? Now, I like listening to world radio, but I can't, some things that I've listened to, let's say when I was in Pakistan or when I was in India or Bangladesh for that matter, I am not able to get to listen to that when I want it because they don't exist on any of the commercial or semi-commercial channels, right? But if I knew a community radio who was able to put this online, be it as an archive file and not necessarily a live stream, at least it's there for me to go and benefit from their creativity, right? Anyway, just the thought that occurred to me whilst he was speaking.
I think that's an interesting sharing, Raj. Really, really good. And I just want to go back to what Osama and also Basur mentioned about reskilling, upskilling. Now, if you look at some of the roles, Raj, you've been working with the ITU as well. There's a lot of ICT reskilling, skilling, and this kind of talks that come up. So I think it's time that we actually revamped ourselves. I think both of you mentioned it, that community radio cannot just operate the way they operated, although that's their strength. Like for instance, my colleague from Nepal is not here. But the fact is, in Nepal, even marriages, right? If you're getting married, you probably go to the community radio and announce it there so that the whole village comes, right? Or if you're selling a cow, they use the community radio to actually sell the cow. So I was quite surprised when, because we work closely with them and you see the needs of that group of people there are totally different. So it goes back to what the local community wants. But in order to keep, because people are changing, development is taking place at such a rapid pace, even in Nepal, even though geographically they are challenged in that sense, but these radios can disappear. So that's why I think radio itself need to, radio operators, right? Be it community radios or even any other radio stations for that matter. It's always about thinking about how you can remain relevant. And this is more so for community radios. But I personally feel, Raj and the rest of the team, that if you have community networks, they are going to enhance and make your radios better. They're going to make sure that there's a sustainable process at the end of the day. So it's definitely a need and definitely something that can create a lot of good, survival for the radio per se. Yes, thank you.
Perhaps one of the other things that, the community radio could bring to community networks is, depending on the level of skill, is some sort of editorial control, nous, understanding of what audience needs are. I mean, we spoke earlier about the social media being unfiltered almost and just out there and the lack of information. But there's this level of skill that can come from some community radio with that understanding that we're actually broadcasting to a number of people. So maybe there's that editorial rigor that could also come from community radio to enhance the development of community networks. And also understanding that multi-platform aspect of creating content as well. And an understanding too that it's not just people in, say, a remote community that we've mentioned before, being interested in their own remote life and culture and language and those sorts of things, but people who aren't in that community, who are elsewhere, whether it be other parts of the country or other parts of the world, are interested in that story too. And I think there's a rebranding, to take up on your point, Baslo, about rebranding of what is existing community radio stations into digital hubs. And I strongly believe that's the way to go. And once there's digital hubs, creating digital content for local communities comes with that the skills development required. The technology tends to file that. Yes, we've got the problems with spectrum and so on, but I can see that sort of happening if we can link in the strengths of community radio. And I started there talking about, that editorial, I guess, understanding of audience to bring it to what the content might be.
And I'll jump in. Yeah, it's really cool to hear that. It's all about making community radio relevant. And, we already see where things are going to go with internet and stuff. So, there's another model we might want to explore that happens. I'm sure it goes on everywhere in the world, and that's ham radio amateur radio operators. They have pieces of radio spectrum assigned just to themselves that they can experiment with. There's an international agreement. If you have a ham radio license in any country, you can go to every country in the world except for 3. It's on the exam. But I'm a ham radio operator, VY1RH, and anyhow. Community radio and ham radio, there is some synergy that can be done there, and that's in emergency situations. So, for example, if there's a catastrophe and you have a power outage and floods and everything collapses, all communications gone, that kind of a scenario, and it does happen all over the world. It's the ham radio operators are able to get a signal out, even just using Morse code. 150-year-old technology. But anyhow, that is a niche that community radio can probably and already does provide services and emergency communications by sharing information and reliable information from source. And you're talking about the skill development, especially where I live up in the far north here, minus 50 degree, 8 months of winter, people are stuck inside. And some of the stuff that's happening with digital skills, coding, programming, making games, digital journalism, all of these things are possible now. And the indigenous groups, all the groups everywhere have intellectual property, have really cool stories, designs that they can share through the world, and that creates employment opportunities that keeps the community alive. So there's lots of different ways that community radio can still be relevant in this world.
Osama, did you want to play that video now?
Yeah, I was requesting that there is a one relevant video that we thought that we can play and show it to you people, since we have time, and it's quite relevant as it is a community network that was done in the middle of pandemic, exactly in the middle of pandemic.
About 3 or 4 years ago, it came to one of the major villages near us, about 10 kilometers. One was 10 kilometers, one was 20 kilometers. So, which meant that we could actually carry our laptops there. So, we would carry our laptops, and we had, there was a favorite tree of ours which we used to sit. So, the thing is that by that time our organization had expanded, and farming had started, the school had started. So all of them needed the email or to check the network to send out something. So we would have a jeep, and everyone would jump into the jeep with their laptops, 5 or 6 of us, and then go off to this village, sit under a tree, finish off all our emails, I think this thing and all, and then come back, downloading, checking whatever it is, and then coming back. Now when COVID happened, an entirely different thing happened, because now especially for the farming unit and the craft unit, sales were by internet, which means that now people are all the time inquiring or ordering or things like that, and then they need immediate replies, because the moment you don't reply for a day, they think you're a fraud. So when COVID happened, it was all the more urgent that we get an internet connection.
वहाँ पर हम लोगों ने कोऑर्डिनेट लेकर के एक प्लान बनाया कि कहाँ से कैसे कनेक्ट किया जाएगा, कितनी ऊंचाई दी जाएगी। प्लान बनाने के बाद मैं यहाँ पहुँचे। देख रहे हैं आप, ऊपर वाला जो डिवाइस है वो रिसीवर है। हम ट्राइबल हॉस्पिटल से इंटरनेट वहाँ से यहाँ लेते हैं, और यहाँ लेने के बाद में इसको हम एक राउटर कॉन्फ़िगर करके, राउटर से पूरा एरिया वाईफाई करके उसमें से एक इथरनेट पोर्ट में से इंटरनेट दोबारा से इस डिवाइस के थ्रू हम दूसरी जगह भेज रहे हैं, जो कि कृष्णा हाउस पे है। तो ये हमारा रिसीवर और ट्रांसफर पॉइंट, दोनों पॉइंट, और ये पूरा एरिया वाइफ हो गया। इससे पहले यहाँ कोई इंटरनेट के चांसेस नहीं थे, यहाँ कोई इंटरनेट इस्तेमाल नहीं कर पाता था।
It's nice, very nice. That in fact, the day it was checked first and it is working. It was like a celebration. Mentally, we didn't do anything, but it is really a nice feeling to have the connectivity.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm sure Raj and Naveed will be smiling from inside, considering that we did it in the middle of COVID, and it was actually Lalita, who is the co-founder. She also said that night she used Netflix to watch movie with the community to celebrate, but we didn't take that on our camera recording.
Yeah, it
They
makes
were
smile.
so happy.
It brings a lot of smiles. Usama, when I saw that woman at the end of the video, her smile, that means a lot, and it takes me to a lot of other things that we've been doing together, where when we bring that smile on the people's face, that means a lot, and that that brings a internal satisfaction as well. I remember in Pakistan we did an experiment to bring an online education into a very rural school in a village where the girls didn't have any access to any computer teacher, though there was a computer lab in that school by the government. So government did give the computers, but they forgot to give the teacher. And that was something that we capitalized, and we connected them with a teacher in Islamabad, a city, and that teacher actually gave them a 4 months crash course on computers, science, mathematics, and English. And I remember, after 4 months when we went to that area and we asked the girls, they were 5th and 6th grade girls, about how was their experience. They were literally feeling over the moon. And we did some assessment as well, and they told us that this was something that we would have never thought in our life, that we'll be learning education over the internet through a teacher who's sitting in a city in Pakistan. So I think this is something that all of us work towards, and these smiles mean a lot, Usama.
I would like to add one point raised by Rob. Can I proceed? Can I proceed?
I think please go ahead.
Okay. Regarding MSR radio or ham radio or MSR radio already shifted. Already they are using internet within their operation, because I am one of the ham radio operator. I am using SDR and as well as Echolink. So using the internet with the ham radio. So this is one of the information, Rob. So policymaker and as well as ITU also loses some attention regarding the ham radio operation, because it's a traditional media. But when ham community using the internet with the radio operation and as well as SDR, then a scenario has already changed. Another information is regarding the spectrum. Every government are facing regarding the spectrum in line with the scarcity. Bangladeshi regulator has already has already withdraw the spectrum, level of degree spectrum from the ham radio side, say 20 meter, 40 meter, and as well as 15 meter. So I think in future also, a regulator withdraw the community airwaves also. If we do not use the proper way, this type of spectrum, so that this is we are under threat by the regulator also. Thank you.
Thanks, Baslur. I think this is very enlightening. So Raj, how much time do we have before we sign off from this?
We have about 10 odd minutes left, so maybe we should move to bringing it to a close, Philo. What do you think?
Yeah, only one thing that I have to add on is about content. I think we have Martin, who's a good content creator, he has trained a lot of our AIBD people, members on content. And I think Bazur also brought up the subject of the content, right? So I think that's still a key importance, is to have good content, and community radio operators constantly need to think of new things or new ideas that you can incorporate. And of course, connectivity is also one of the things, the internet, these are things that they should be putting into their content from now onwards, at least. Osama. Martin, what do you think of that?
Yeah, Philo, content and also radio format, say like magazine program, news program, radio format.
I think you're right there, Philomena, and right onto it, because that's it. I mean, let's face it. I think if we're radio people in the room, we get involved in radio to start with ourselves because it was exciting and interesting. We might find an audience and those. I think the same thing translates to the content as we develop to fit the age that we live in, the digital age. I can't implore enough the people that I work with to try and make sure that they produce for multi-platforms, multi-digital platforms and radio as well, and to try and make sure they're better at that. And I think there's excitement that can come for all of our communities to having people involved in different levels, whether it's through audio distribution or photography, video, text, blogs. I mean, there's so much possibility. And I still come back to that point about the hubs or the community stations with their garnered experience over many years. And I suppose they've paved the way for many of the content creators to try and be the thin edge of that, the leading edge, to try and develop more content. Rob mentioned earlier before content being king. I mean, that hasn't changed. It's just the delivery method and the competition for it. And there are always going to be niche markets with long tails and all those sorts of digital discussions we've had over the years. But I still think content creation is still, for me anyway, is right at the center. If we don't have great content, no one listens anyway. If we don't have the emergency broadcasting when there's the emergency on, we're not helpful. It sort of goes to reason that we need to really concentrate on the content.
Thank you, Martin. Well said, because I think if you want people to be hooked on to community radios, if you want that to continue, one of the ways is also to make sure that you create good content, right? And content makers have a huge responsibility, actually, in ensuring that community radio stays. Community network, okay? It helps. It's cream on the cake, right? It's going to be something that's really exciting, interesting for people to continue and to go on. I also want to talk about one more thing, which I think community radios can play a huge role in, and that is, I think Bazlur mentioned this as well, on disinformation. Now, this is very, very important, because I think even the ITU is doing programs on disinformation and so forth. So I think this is where community radios have a huge role in ensuring that the right information reaches the people. Just like traditional radios, right? We all have, when we hear a story about what's happening with COVID, or we want to get the real stuff without anything doctored, we'll listen to the national radio or national TV or whatnot. So it's similar with community radios. They should have this responsibility in making sure that they give the most credible, factual information, right? So that way they will also become strong. But for instance, in countries like Korea, people are afraid of having community radios because they're afraid that it can cause other problems, right? Political problems or disinformation. So I think this is where community radio practitioners also have to boost up their ethics and really look at providing information that's credible, worthwhile, and not just sensationalized content and so forth. Yes. Thank you. Anyone else wants to add on to that before we sign off, Raj? Yep.
I'll just quickly jump in, because it's always good to end with a success note. So I was part of the previous session as a listener, and I saw that there were comments made about the Universal Service Fund, about how we can get support from the regulators and policymakers for the community network. So I just wanted to share a success that we've been able to achieve in a small island down in Pacific, Papua New Guinea, where we've been engaging with the regulator for the past 2 years. In fact, we have involved regulator to deploy a community network because we believe it's very important that we come up with these kind of partnership with the government or the regulators, because then you can showcase and talk to the other regulators in other countries that, look, this is something that we have done successfully in this country, so why don't we try to do this in here as well. So the regulator has included community broadband network as a 2022 project proposal for universal service obligation. Actually in Papua New Guinea, they call it UAS, Universal Access Service. So it's a good success, a big success for us from the community network perspective. And whenever you talk in future with any regulator, you can always pass on an example from Papua New Guinea where the regulator has included community network to fund the proposals for next year, which means any person, any citizen of or any organization within PNG can submit a proposal to deploy a community network, and the regulator will give the funds through universal service. So that's an excellent success that I wanted to share. So that could be noted. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's a very positive ending, Naveed. There is light at the end of the tunnel, so it should inspire the rest of us, to use whatever funds that Raj was discussing earlier on the chat group. So there's a lot of millions to be, or billions rather, to be looked at, and perhaps getting the ITU and Internet Society as well, and AIBD on its part with broadcasters and also community broadcasters to really revitalize and ensure that community networks will not just remain something that we talk here, but will become more vibrant, and community radios are able to have access to this. Yes, Osama, it's back to you.
No, so I was just saying that to end formally, may we request, because we are this quorum is 4:3. 4 are mostly CR heavy, and the 3 are CN heavy. So I would say that. So can we just say one sentence or one line, which is social media friendly, saying that way to go forward, and then close? So maybe we can start with Rob, and then Martin, and then Philomena, and then Bazlur, and then Naveed, and then Raj, and then we finish.
Oh, geez, if it's me, one-liner, Facebook sucks. Listen to your FM radio. But hey, we're talking about format. My quick thing about format: when I work with commercial radio, it's like, yeah, this is how you do things, and this is how you always did it. And this is, standard operating procedure. When I go to a First Nation station, setting up something brand new, I tell them to take the format and throw it out the window. Do whatever you guys want. You tell me what you want to do, I will make it happen. And you don't have to go through the old processes, and you don't have to go through a stereotype thing. So, do whatever you want. Language lessons is bingo in Indigenous languages. But anyhow, it's been great chatting with everybody here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Martin?
I'm not really sure what to say. I was thinking about this session being about community networks and community radio being twins. Well, they're not identical twins, but fraternal twins. So still from the same place and coming with the same good. And did you ask about some comment about social media? Well, maybe community radio and community networks are the new Facebook.
Okay, wonderful. Philomena?
Thank you, Osama. I want to say that, radio has survived very, very long, way before, they said that video kills the radio star. Some of you might be familiar with that piece of music, but radio has never died. And I'm excited as a practitioner to actually see that community radios are still very much alive, looking at the faces that are here on Zoom and the number of chats that we are seeing. I see a huge potential. But I also see that you need to leverage on the multi-platform. One of you mentioned on podcasting. I think that, it's metaverse, like Raj says, everything has changed. So let's look at the way radio moves. Yeah, there's a whole lot of potential and I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Bazlur Bhai.
Yeah, very clear. Creating a community network. Creating community network for e-enabling, e-engaging, and e-engaging, e-enabling with community radio broadcasting. Thank you.
Hey, Naveed.
So I would say let's keep building and promoting community networks and community radios, because I firmly believe that these networks are going to connect the unconnected, not those billion-dollar companies.
Raj, last word.
So, I would think we always say for the community, by the community, with the community. And that's what really the two fraternal twins are about, aren't they? It's all about the community and what they want and need. So let's put a bit more focus on it. Companies come and go, commercial companies come and go, but people are, the community always lives on. So we need to empower them. One more thing I want to add. Philo and team at AIBD, it's been an absolute pleasure today. And of course, our esteemed speakers, this collaboration that we embarked on. I mean, on the first day I mentioned that, we're trying to broaden out the conversations we have so that, we're not talking about ourselves to ourselves. And I think this is what some of it has been about, broadening out the conversation, bringing in some new faces, some new dimensions and perspectives. And that is so very important because, we can't exist in silos, right? We've now deemed that we are fraternal twins between CR and NCR. Now we need to see how we can, further explore those synergies and move forward with it. And that's why I really do believe in, having these wider conversations. And I hope that we can continue this journey. Today was perhaps the start. On Tuesday, may I also invite all of you from at least the CR community, please do consider joining us. Philo will be speaking on Tuesday. And we will be covering some of the issues that we talked about today, including misinformation. And Harish, who's been very active posting on the chat today and asking us hard questions. He will also be a speaker, and we'll be looking at the rural innovation angle to see what sort of complementary things we can leverage there. So there's some great sessions on Tuesday, so please do join us. It'll be a short format session like today. Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you all so very much for being with us today. And Osama, back to you to wind it down. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful, great. Thank you very much. So good that Raj has done the lot, which I don't have to repeat, but I will certainly say my comment to add my comment, especially I was inspired by what Rob said, is that, FB sucks and we need voice. So I would say voice is a metaphor, everybody needs to have their voice. So let's not forget that without voice, we cannot have a voice, So therefore, even though we are going to live in a world of data, the voice and data need to be contextually complement with each other. Let's not allow voice to vanish under the AI of data or under the garb of data, which most of the internet has got converted into. So CN can be that what will bring the voice of the voiceless, what Raj said, So to do voice of the voiceless, it is important to bring the metaphor of voice and the radio, So let's marry both and take it forward. And we are suffering from a lot of issues of the internet propagation. Let's save internet by putting it a voice of wisdom, by putting it the rest of the 3.5 billion people who are not connected to be connected with their voices rather than with their data. Thank you very much. It was fantastic to have all of you, and thank you for sticking for all the couple of hours of things. We are very happy with the organizing team that it was smooth from the technical perspective. We could show all the video, we could show all the presentation. So thank you very much. And I hope that all of you are still fine from your cold area, warm area, unconnected or connected area to log in again on Tuesday, same time. See you again. And that will be the last day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osama. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Good day. Bye.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a
Catch
lot,
you next
everyone.
time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Osama bhai.
Yes.
One thing is, Facebook started the metaverse.
Yes, yes.
So if community radio people include the CN, that is
Yes.
called community radio metaverse.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. When you are back in Dhaka, let's talk for longer discussion, in peace, so that we can actually go back to some of our previous discussions and see the leveraging of what we have talked.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will inform you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
See you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny, Sheel, and Pranita. Thank you very much.